Makeup giant Sephora has settled a lawsuit with a Glendale woman who says she contracted oral herpes from a lipstick sample. No terms of the deal were revealed. The woman alleges she got a cold sore on her lip in 2015 after trying a lipstick at a Sephora store in Hollywood. Sephora released a statement after the lawsuit was initially filed, saying the health and safety of our clients is our foremost priority, and they take product hygiene very seriously.
7 lipstick brands sitting in makeup bags right now have been directly named in federal lead testing, and one of them was just independently tested this year and came back with mercury and arsenic in the exact same tube. This is not speculation. This is the FDA's own 400 lipstick study. This is a 2026 independent lab result. One parent company holds 3 of the highest spots under 3 completely different names. We are naming every single one today. Then we are showing you 3 brands that actually tested clean, including one where the cheapest lipstick in the entire federal study came back the safest. Stay to the end. Avoid brand 1, Maybelline. A slim black tube sits in a makeup bag, reapplied throughout the day without a second thought, chosen specifically because Maybelline built its identity around being the drugstore standard, the brand every teenager's first lipstick came from, and every adult still reaches for out of habit. People trusted Maybelline because it has spent decades as the most recognizable name in accessible color cosmetics. The brand that made a full face of makeup possible on a drugstore budget, which made the ingredient list feel like something already settled by decades of mass market use rather than something worth double-checking. That kind of familiarity builds its own quiet authority, the sense that a name this common must have already been vetted by millions of daily users before it ever reached your own bathroom counter. Here is the reveal. The FDA's expanded 2010 study of 400 popular lipsticks found lead in nearly every single product tested, and Maybelline's Color Sensational in Pink Petal came back with the highest concentration recorded across the entire study, 7.19 parts per million. That is not a trace finding buried near the bottom of a long list. That is the single worst result out of 400 separate products tested by the federal government itself, sitting inside one of the most widely purchased lipstick lines in the country. Looks like the reliable, everyday drugstore staple. Reads like the single highest lead result recorded across an entire federal study of 400 competing products. Set the everyday familiarity against the actual ranking. A reliable, decades-old drugstore name is the reputation most people carry into the store. The highest recorded lead concentration in the FDA's entire study is the specific result sitting inside that same familiar tube. For the shopper who thought a decades-old, universally recognized brand meant a formula already vetted and settled, this is what you actually bought. The single highest lead result recorded across 400 separate products tested by the federal government. Not a marginal finding, but the literal top of the list. The carve-out. The FDA itself has stated these trace lead levels do not pose a safety concern at typical use levels, and the agency has not recalled or restricted the shade in question, so this is a documented federal finding rather than an active recall. Checking a specific shade against published testing data before buying is the most useful step available here, since lead levels varied significantly by shade within the same product line. Everyday familiarity, highest recorded result, same tube either way. Up next, a brand that came in a close second in the exact same federal study, owned by the exact same parent company. Avoid brand 2, L'Oreal Paris. A gold tube sits on a vanity, chosen specifically because L'Oreal Paris carries a certain aspirational weight, a name that shows up in prestige counter advertising even while selling at a drugstore price point, which made it feel like the smarter upgrade over a basic brand. People trusted L'Oreal Paris because the brand built its identity around a worth-it positioning, sophisticated packaging, and French-sounding names that made a $15 lipstick feel like it belonged closer to a department store counter than a pharmacy aisle. A reputation the brand cultivated deliberately for decades through advertising built specifically around aspiration rather than affordability. Here is the reveal. In the same FDA study that found Maybelline's Pink Petal at the top of the list, L'Oreal Paris Color Riche and Volcanic came in second at 7 parts per million, just behind the single highest result recorded. L'Oreal USA owns both L'Oreal Paris and Maybelline, meaning the 2 highest lead results in the FDA's entire 400 lipstick study both trace back to the exact same parent company under 2 separate consumer-facing names. Looks like the sophisticated, worth-it upgrade from a basic drugstore tube. Reads like the second highest lead result in the same federal study that flagged its own sibling brand at the very top. Trace the ownership fact directly. L'Oreal USA owns L'Oreal Paris. L'Oreal USA owns Maybelline. The two highest results in an entire federal study of 400 products both sit inside brands owned by the exact same company. For the shopper who thought a sophisticated aspirational name meant a meaningfully different formula than a basic drugstore brand, this is what you actually bought. The second highest lead result in the same study that named its own sibling brand as the worst, both under one shared corporate parent, the carve-out. As with Maybelline, the FDA has not recalled this shade and maintains these levels are not an acute safety concern, and lead levels varied by shade rather than applying uniformly across the entire product line, so checking a specific shade remains the most useful step. Sophisticated positioning. Second highest result. Same company as the first? Up next, a third brand under this exact same parent company, named in an earlier federal study, identifying the three manufacturers with the worst lead levels overall. Avoid brand 3. Body Shop. A bottle, green tube sits in a bathroom drawer, purchased specifically because Body Shop built its entire reputation around ethical sourcing and natural ingredients. A brand founded on the promise of being the conscientious alternative to mainstream cosmetics rather than just another name competing on the same drugstore shelf. People trusted Body Shop because the brand's founding story centered on cruelty-free testing and community trade sourcing, long before clean beauty became a mainstream marketing category, which made every ingredient claim feel like it came with an extra layer of scrutiny the rest of the industry didn't bother with. That founding story traveled with the brand for decades, shaping how customers read every claim on every product long after the company changed hands. Here is the reveal. The FDA's earlier 2009 study, which first identified lead across a smaller sample of lipsticks, named three manufacturers with the highest lead levels overall: Procter & Gamble's CoverGirl, Revlon, and L'Oreal, whose portfolio at the time specifically included L'Oreal, Body Shop, and Maybelline brands. Body Shop sits inside the same corporate parent already named twice in this investigation, meaning three separate brands built on three completely different reputations: ethical sourcing, drugstore accessibility, and prestige positioning, all traced back to one shared manufacturer in the same federal findings. Looks like the ethical, conscientious alternative to mainstream cosmetics. Reads like the third brand under the exact same parent company, already flagged twice in this same federal record. Trace the ownership fact all the way through. L'Oreal USA owns L'Oreal Paris. L'Oreal USA owns Maybelline. L'Oreal USA owned Body Shop. Three brands, three completely different reputations. One shared parent company sitting behind all three federal findings. For the shopper who thought an ethically positioned community trade brand meant a fundamentally different manufacturing standard than a mainstream drugstore name, this is what you actually bought. A third brand under the exact same parent company already named twice in the same federal lead testing. The carve-out. Body Shop's community fair trade sourcing program for raw ingredients like shea butter and cocoa butter is independently documented and unrelated to the lead finding, which traces back to pigment sourcing rather than the ethical trade ingredients the brand is best known for. Three brands, three reputations, one shared company. Up next, a brand named directly by the FDA itself as one of only three manufacturers with the highest lead levels in the entire original study. Avoid brand 4. CoverGirl. A bright, easy-to-recognize case sits at eye level in the drugstore aisle, chosen specifically because CoverGirl built its identity around being the accessible, all-American beauty standard, the brand behind decades of recognizable spokesmodels and a promise of effortless, everyday color. People trusted CoverGirl because it positioned itself as the trustworthy, mass-market default, a brand practically synonymous with the entire drugstore cosmetics category, which made it feel like the safe, unremarkable choice rather than one that needed any specific scrutiny. That default status is exactly what made it easy to overlook. Since nobody scrutinizes the brand, everyone already assumes has been scrutinized by somebody else first. Here is the reveal. The FDA's own testing named Procter & Gamble's CoverGirl as one of only three manufacturers, alongside L'Oreal and Revlon, identified with the highest lead levels in its original study. The expanded 400 lipstick study confirmed this pattern further, with CoverGirl's Queen collection, vibrant hues in Ruby Remix, and its continuous color in Warm Brick, both landing in the federal government's own top 10 highest lead results. Looks like the trustworthy, all-American default choice. Reads like a manufacturer, the FDA itself specifically named as one of only 3 with the highest lead levels recorded. Weigh the brand's own reputation for being the safe, unremarkable default against the specific federal finding. A trustworthy, everyday standard is the brand's own reputation. One of only 3 manufacturers named with the highest lead levels is the FDA's own specific finding sitting against that same reputation. For the shopper who thought the most recognizable, mass-market name meant the safest possible default choice, this is what you actually bought. One of only 3 manufacturers the FDA itself specifically identified as carrying the highest lead levels across its entire testing program. The carve-out. CoverGirl's True Blend line uses a different pigment formulation than the shades named in the federal testing, and checking a specific product against the published shade level data remains the most useful step before buying. All-American reputation. One of 3 worst manufacturers, 2 separate shades confirmed. Up next, a brand named alongside CoverGirl as one of those same 3 worst performing manufacturers, this time built around a legacy of old Hollywood glamour rather than everyday accessibility. Avoid brand 5, Revlon. A sleek golden black case sits in a purse, chosen specifically because Revlon carries decades of glamour associated with its name. The brand behind some of the most iconic red lipstick shades in American beauty history. A reputation built on old Hollywood-style sophistication rather than anything clinical. People trusted Revlon because the brand positioned itself as the affordable glamour standard. The tube women reached for specifically to feel a little more polished, a little more finished, built on a legacy of recognizable red shades that made the formula feel like a settled classic rather than something worth questioning. Generations of women grew up watching their mothers reach for the exact same shade, which turned the brand into something closer to a family tradition than a cosmetic choice made fresh each time. Here is the reveal. The FDA's original lead testing named Revlon as one of only 3 manufacturers, alongside CoverGirl and L'Oreal, identified with the highest lead levels found across the entire study. This was not a single flagged shade buried in a larger, mostly clean lineup. This was the federal government specifically singling out Revlon by name as one of the 3 worst performing manufacturers in its own testing program. The exact same designation carried by 2 other brands already covered in this investigation. Looks like an affordable, glamorous classic built on decades of iconic shades. Reads like one of only 3 manufacturers the federal government specifically named with the highest lead levels in its entire study. Weigh the glamorous, legacy reputation against the specific federal designation. Decades of iconic, affordable glamour is the brand's own reputation. One of only 3 manufacturers named with the highest lead levels is the FDA's own specific finding sitting underneath that same glamorous history. For the woman who thought a legacy glamour brand meant a formula settled and vetted by decades of trusted use, this is what you actually bought. One of only 3 manufacturers the federal government itself specifically named as carrying the highest lead levels across its entire testing program. The carve-out. Revlon's super lustrous line was not among the specific shades named in the FDA's top 10 highest results, and checking a specific shade against published testing data remains more useful than avoiding the brand as a whole, since lead levels varied significantly across Revlon's broader catalog rather than applying uniformly. Affordable glamour. One of 3 worst manufacturers. Same federal finding as 2 brands already covered. Up next, a prestige brand, proving that a higher price tag never once predicted a cleaner result in the same federal testing. Avoid brand 6. Nars. A matte black tube with minimalist branding sits on a vanity next to genuinely expensive skincare, purchased specifically because Nars carries a prestige, editorial reputation, the kind of brand featured in high-fashion campaigns rather than drugstore end caps. People trusted Nars because the brand built its identity around a sophisticated, artist-driven aesthetic, positioned well above mass-market pricing, specifically to signal a more considered, higher-quality formula, the kind of purchase people made assuming the higher price bought a meaningfully cleaner product. A prestige counter display carries its own kind of implied authority, the sense that a higher shelf and a higher price must come paired with a higher manufacturing standard behind the scenes. Here is the reveal. The FDA's expanded 400 lipstick study found 2 separate Nars shades landing in the federal government's own top 10 highest lead results, semi-matte in Red Lizard and semi-matte in Funny Face. both measured well above the average lead concentration found across the entire study. This placed a prestige, editorial brand directly alongside drugstore names already covered in this investigation, with two separate shades rather than a single isolated result. Looks like a sophisticated, editorial, higher quality formula worth its premium price. Reads like a brand with two separate shades landing in the federal government's own top 10 highest lead results. Sitting alongside the drugstore brands, it was priced well above. Weigh the premium price against the specific federal ranking. A higher price point is the entire justification most people give for choosing a prestige brand over a drugstore one. Two separate shades in the federal government's own top 10 highest lead results is the specific finding sitting against that same premium justification. For the shopper who thought a higher price tag guaranteed a meaningfully cleaner formula than anything sold at a drugstore, this is what you actually bought. Two separate shades landing in the exact same federal top 10 list as brands priced at a fraction of the cost. The carve-out. Nars' broader catalog includes shades outside the two specifically named in the federal testing, and the brand's higher pigment concentration formulas, which tend to correlate with elevated lead findings across the industry, are not present in every shade the brand sells. Prestige pricing. Same federal list, two shades, not one. Up next, a brand tested this year rather than over a decade ago with a result more severe than anything found in the federal study. Avoid Brand 7. McGrath Labs. A weighty, luxury packaged tube sits in a collection specifically curated around one of the most celebrated names in the entire makeup industry. Purchased at a price point that signals artistry and technical mastery above nearly everything else in this investigation. People trusted McGrath Labs because the brand was built entirely around the reputation of one of the most respected makeup artists working today, a name synonymous with runway innovation and technical precision, which made the formula feel like it existed on an entirely different tier of scrutiny than a mass-market product. An artist's own name on the tube carries an implied promise that nothing about the formula was left to a cost-cutting decision made somewhere else in the supply chain. Here is the reveal. An independent third-party accredited lab, commissioned in 2026, tested McGrath Labs' Liquilust Legendary Wear matte lipstick in the shade Elson and found mercury, lead, and arsenic present in the formula. This is not a federal study running over a decade old. This is a current, independent laboratory result, and it is the only entry in this investigation naming three separate heavy metals in a single product rather than lead alone. Looks like the technical, artist-driven pinnacle of the entire lipstick category. Reads like the only product in this investigation independently confirmed to carry three separate heavy metals rather than one. Weigh the artistic, technical reputation against the specific 2026 lab result. A celebrated artist-built reputation is the entire premise behind the brand's premium price. Mercury, lead, and arsenic, confirmed present in an independent lab test, is the current finding sitting underneath that same premium reputation. For the collector who thought an artist-driven, technically celebrated formula meant a standard above the mass-market brands covered earlier in this investigation, this is what you actually bought. The only product in this entire investigation independently confirmed to carry three separate heavy metals in a single tube, tested this year rather than over a decade ago. The carve-out. This was the first product this particular independent testing initiative examined, meaning there is not yet comparable data across McGrath Labs' broader catalog to confirm whether this result applies to other shades in the line, and further testing was planned to build out that comparison. Celebrated reputation. Three heavy metals. Tested this year, not over a decade ago. That closes out all seven. Three under one parent company. Three named directly by the federal government as the worst performing manufacturers in its own testing. One tested independently this year with the most severe result in the entire investigation. Okay, stop for a second. You just sat through 7 brands, and price point never once predicted the result. A $10 drugstore lipstick and an ultra-premium prestige tube both landed in this investigation. One parent company held the two highest lead concentrations in the entire federal study under two separate names, then showed up a third time under a brand built around ethical sourcing. A founder builds a reputation, glamour, prestige, ethics, accessibility, 4 completely different stories. The federal testing and one fresh independent lab result say the same thing sat underneath all 4. That is not 7 separate stories. That is one story told 7 times, confirmed by the FDA's own testing and a lab result from this year. Worth it, pick one. Wet n Wild. Where others charge a premium price while landing near the top of a federal lead study, Wet n Wild sells the cheapest lipstick in that same study and came back with the lowest lead level recorded. The brand built its identity around being the accessible, no-frills option for anyone experimenting with color without a prestige budget. A drugstore staple that never asked for brand loyalty the way its pricier competitors did. Here is the proof. The FDA's own 400 lipstick study, the exact same testing that named Maybelline and L'Oreal, at the top of the list, found Wet n Wild's Bahama Mama shade carried the lowest lead concentration of every single product tested, verified by the same federal source used against every failing brand in this investigation. The formula's lower pigment concentration and simpler manufacturing process likely account for the result, proving that a lower price point never automatically meant a worse outcome. The opposite of what most of this investigation just demonstrated. The honest limitation. Wet n Wild's formula prioritizes accessibility and shade range over long wear, so it may not hold up through a full day the way a longer-wearing formula would. Price and availability. Around $5, sold at nearly every major drugstore and retailer. For anyone who sat through the Nars entry and assumed a higher price meant a cleaner result, this is what the same federal data actually showed at the opposite end of the price scale. Up next, a brand holding itself to an internal standard stricter than what regulation actually requires. Worth it, pick 2. Ilia. Where others rely on regulatory silence to avoid testing at all, Ilia holds itself to an internal lead standard stricter than federal regulation and tests every product through its own overseen process. The brand was built around the idea that skincare-grade ingredients belonged in color cosmetics, treating a lipstick formula with the same scrutiny most brands reserve for a serum. Here is the proof. Ilia's internal standard sets lead at 5 parts per million, well below the 10 parts per million typically considered a trace level. And lead analysis is carried out across all products through labs the company directly oversees rather than relying solely on supplier documentation. Every raw material comes with a certificate of analysis reviewed by an external regulatory team, a level of documentation several of the failing brands in this investigation never disclosed publicly. The honest limitation. This is an internally set and internally overseen standard rather than a fully independent, publicly published lab report for every shade, so it sits a step below a true third-party certification, worth knowing even as the standard itself is meaningfully stricter than federal law requires. Price and availability. Around $28 to $32, sold at Sephora and through the brand's own website. Up next, a brand built around a third-party clean beauty standard rather than an internal one. Worth it, pick 3. Axiology. Where others make a clean claim without outside verification, Axiology sells lipstick certified under the Credo Clean Standard, a third-party retailer standard forbidding over 2,700 potentially harmful substances. The brand was built around a minimal ingredient philosophy, formulas using fewer than 10 ingredients total rather than the long, hard-to-parse lists running through most conventional lipstick formulas. Here is the proof. Axiology certification comes from Credo, an outside retailer standard rather than the brand's own internal claim, the exact kind of independent verification several failing brands in this investigation never had behind their own marketing. The formula relies on ingredients like cocoa butter and coconut oil, rather than the synthetic pigment systems more commonly associated with elevated lead findings across the wider industry. The honest limitation. Axiology's balm-based formulas deliver a sheerer, more buildable color payoff than a fully opaque, long-wearing lipstick, so anyone wanting maximum pigment in a single swipe may need to layer the product. Price and availability. Around $22 to $26, sold through Credo Beauty and the brand's own website. You just sat through 10 brands, 7 confirmed by federal testing or an independent 2026 lab result. L'Oreal USA holding the 2 highest lead concentrations in the entire FDA study, then showing up a third time under Body Shop, CoverGirl, and Revlon, both specifically named by the FDA as 2 of only 3 worst-performing manufacturers. McGrath Labs, testing positive for 3 separate heavy metals this year alone. It is not a mistake, it is the model. Here is what you do tomorrow morning. Pick up whatever lipstick sits closest to your mirror and check the shade name against published federal testing data before your next application. Tell me which of these 7 brands has been in your makeup bag the longest, without you ever checking who owns it. If someone you know is still wearing one of these shades every day, send them this video before their next reapplication. The system is not broken. It is working exactly the way it was built to work. You were never supposed to check what parent company sat behind your favorite shade. Stay sharp, read those labels, keep rising.